47 minutes before the state of Montana planned to take away a man's future, he asked for a dog. Not a lawyer, not a pastor, not a final meal, just a dog. The request moved quietly through the prison halls like a cold wind beneath a locked door. Guards exchanged glances. Administrators frowned at paperwork. A few people shook their heads, unable to understand why a condemned man would spend his final moments thinking about a German shepherd. But Ethan Walker never changed his mind. He sat alone in a small room inside Blackstone Correctional Facility, his hands folded calmly on the steel table before him. At 42 years old, Ethan looked older than he should have. Years of confinement had carved shadows beneath his hazel eyes and streaks of silver through his short brown hair. Yet there was still something steady about him, something unbroken. Beyond the narrow window, the November sky hung low over the mountains. Snow clouds gathered over the distant peaks, turning the horizon the color of worn steel. The world outside continued moving as if this day were no different from any other. Cars traveled highways. Families ate dinner. Children laughed somewhere beneath warm porch lights. But inside these walls, a clock ticked toward a moment no one could ignore. Ethan listened to that clock. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound seemed louder than the last. The highway stretched beneath a pale winter sky as a black transport vehicle moved steadily through western Montana. Snow drifted across open fields in thin silver ribbons, pushed by a cold wind that carried the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. Inside the vehicle, Rex lay quietly on a padded platform. His large frame was older now. Gray touched the edges of his muzzle, and a faint scar crossed the bridge of his nose. Yet his amber eyes remained alert, watching every movement beyond the glass. Across from him sat Deputy Marshal Claire Dawson, a woman in her late 30s with calm blue eyes and a weathered brown jacket zipped to her chin. She had spent most of her career transporting witnesses, inmates, and evidence. Never a dog, especially not a dog with a file as unusual as Rex's. The folder rested on her lap. During the 3-hour drive, she had read it twice. 7 years earlier, after Ethan Walker's conviction, Rex had been transferred to a regional K-9 training facility outside Billings. The trainers expected the transition to take a few weeks. Instead, something strange happened. Rex refused every new partner. Some handlers were patient. Others were experienced veterans with decades of canine work behind them. It did not matter. The German shepherd obeyed commands. He completed exercises. He followed instructions perfectly. But he never bonded. Never. The reports described the same pattern again and again. He would perform every task flawlessly, then spend hours staring toward the facility gate, waiting, as if someone was supposed to come back. Claire turned another page. One trainer wrote that Rex kept an old tennis ball untouched in the corner of his kennel for nearly 5 years. Another reported that every September 12th, the dog became restless and refused meals. No one knew why. The date meant nothing to the staff. Yet year after year the behavior repeated. Claire looked up from the file and studied the shepherd. Rex appeared calm, but something had changed during the last hour. His ears twitched more often now. His nose lifted toward the air vents. Every few minutes he shifted position and stared through the windshield. The prison was still nearly 30 miles away. There was no logical reason for him to sense anything. Yet the dog seemed increasingly focused, as though an invisible thread had begun pulling him forward. Claire glanced at the driver. Has he been doing that the whole trip? The driver nodded. Started about an hour ago. Rex slowly rose to his feet. His posture stiffened. Not aggressive. Not anxious. Certain. Outside, the landscape rolled past in shades of white and gray. Farmhouses appeared and vanished behind curtains of snow. Church steeples pierced the horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills stood Blackstone Correctional Facility. Somewhere beyond those walls sat a man counting down the final minutes of a life he had never stopped believing would be understood one day. Rex pressed closer to the window. His breathing slowed. 41 minutes remained. And for the first time in 7 years, the dog seemed absolutely certain he was heading exactly where he belonged. 39 minutes remained. Snow drifted gently across the prison parking lot as the transport vehicle rolled through the final security gate. The steel barriers rose slowly, groaning against the winter cold. Rex remained standing the entire time. His amber eyes never left the view ahead. Deputy Marshal Claire Dawson noticed it immediately. Most dogs reacted to unfamiliar places with curiosity or caution. Rex showed neither. He stared at the prison as though he had seen it before, even though every record said he had never entered these grounds. The vehicle stopped beside a maintenance entrance. A corrections officer opened the rear door, and cold air rushed inside, carrying the scent of snow, diesel fuel, and distant pine. Rex stepped down carefully onto the pavement. For a moment, he simply stood there. His nose lifted. The wind brushed through the gray fur around his muzzle. Then something changed. His ears rose higher. His body became perfectly still. Claire followed his gaze toward the prison walls. 40 feet away stood a narrow row of windows reflecting the pale afternoon sky. Somewhere behind one of those windows sat Ethan Walker. Rex took a slow step forward. Then another. Not pulling. Not rushing. Moving with quiet certainty. Inside the administration wing, Warden Samuel Pierce reviewed the final schedule for the day. He was a practical man nearing retirement, known for following procedures exactly as written. Yet even he felt uneasy about this unusual request. Across 3 decades in corrections, he had witnessed countless final visits from family members, ministers, and attorneys. Never a police dog. He looked up when his assistant entered. "The animal has arrived." Pierce sighed softly. "How much time?" 37 minutes. The warden closed the folder before him. "Prepare the visitation room." Meanwhile, Ethan sat alone listening to the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The photograph still rested in his hands. He studied it as though trying to memorize every detail one last time. The younger version of himself smiled beside Rex beneath a bright July sun. It had been taken after a search and rescue mission near Glacier National Park. A little girl had wandered into the woods and become lost overnight. Rex found her just after dawn. Ethan remembered the smell of wet grass that morning, the sunlight filtering through pine branches, the little girl wrapping her arms around the German shepherd's neck while her parents cried with relief. That had been the day someone called Rex a hero. Ethan had laughed and scratched behind the dog's ears. "You hear that, partner?" he had said. "You are famous now." The memory warmed him for only a moment before fading back into silence. Then a faint sound echoed somewhere beyond the corridor. Ethan froze. It was distant, barely audible. The click of claws against concrete. Once, twice, then again. His heart began to pound for the first time all day. Outside, Rex had entered the building. The German shepherd paused at an intersection of hallways. Officers watched quietly from both sides. The dog ignored them all. Instead, he turned his head toward a long corridor leading deeper into the prison. A low sound escaped his throat. Not a bark, not a growl. Something softer, almost like recognition. 35 minutes remained. And for the first time in 7 years, both man and dog knew they were finally close. 30 minutes remained. The visitation room sat at the far end of a quiet corridor where even the air seemed reluctant to move. A single table stood beneath soft fluorescent lights. The walls were plain. The floor shined with the dull reflection of decades of footsteps. Warden Samuel Pierce entered first, followed by Deputy Marshal Claire Dawson and 2 corrections officers. No one spoke much. There was a strange feeling hanging over the room, something difficult to name. Anticipation, perhaps, or the sense that they were about to witness something deeply personal. Moments later, Ethan Walker was escorted inside. He moved calmly, carrying the same worn photograph in one hand. His eyes briefly scanned the room before settling on the empty doorway across from him. Then he sat down and waited. The clock on the wall continued its steady march forward. Tick, tick, tick. 29 minutes remained. Somewhere beyond the door, Rex was being led through the final security checkpoint. The German shepherd obeyed every instruction without resistance. Yet his focus never drifted. His ears remained forward. His amber eyes searched every corner. The officers guiding him exchanged curious glances. One younger guard whispered that he had never seen a dog so attentive. Another quietly replied that it looked less like the animal was searching for someone and more like he already knew exactly where he was going. The final door opened. Rex stepped forward. The room fell silent. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. 7 years suddenly felt like a lifetime. The dog appeared larger than he remembered and older too. Gray touched his muzzle now. Time had left its mark on both of them. For a moment, neither moved. The distance between them was barely 20 feet, yet it felt impossibly wide. Rex stopped near the doorway. His gaze moved across the room, over the table, across the walls. past the officers, then finally toward Ethan. The man's heart pounded. He waited for recognition, waited for the joyful reaction he had imagined through countless sleepless nights. But Rex did not move. He simply stared. Seconds stretched painfully. Ethan lowered his eyes. A quiet ache settled in his chest. Perhaps 7 years was too long. Perhaps memory had finally surrendered to time. Around the room, no one dared speak. Claire Dawson watched carefully, feeling unexpected sympathy for both of them. Then something caught her attention. Rex was not looking at Ethan's face. He was staring at the photograph resting on the table. The dog took one slow step forward, then another. His nose twitched. His ears shifted slightly. Ethan noticed it too. He gently picked up the photograph and held it closer to his chest. The old paper carried traces of years gone by. Dust, sunlight, faded memories, and perhaps something else. A scent. Rex suddenly froze. His entire body became still. The room seemed to stop breathing with him. Then the German shepherd released a soft whine, so faint it was almost lost beneath the hum of the lights. Ethan looked up. Their eyes met again. This time something had changed. 27 minutes remained, and the first spark of recognition had finally begun to awaken. Chin Sua 26 minutes remained. The soft whine lingered in the room like an echo from another life. Rex stood motionless, his amber eyes locked on Ethan. The years between them seemed to hang in the air, heavy and uncertain. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He had imagined this moment thousands of times. Some nights, he pictured Rex charging across the room immediately. Other nights, he feared exactly this silence. He slowly placed the photograph back on the table and offered a faint smile. The same smile he used to give his partner before every shift. The same smile that had once meant everything was going to be all right. Rex blinked. His ears twitched again. Then his gaze drifted downward toward Ethan's hands. The dog stared for several seconds. Something deep inside his memory seemed to stir. Ethan noticed it. Carefully, he lifted his right hand and rested it on the edge of the table. Not reaching, not calling, simply waiting. The room remained perfectly still. Even the officers appeared reluctant to move. Deputy Marshal Claire Dawson found herself holding her breath. Across 7 years of separation, there was no manual for what happened next. Then Ethan spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, rough from emotion and time. Good boy. The words were simple, almost ordinary. Yet the effect was immediate. Rex's head lifted sharply. His eyes widened. The sound of those 2 words seemed to travel somewhere far beyond the prison walls. Somewhere beyond the years. Ethan felt a sudden rush of memories. Early mornings. Training fields covered in frost. Search operations beneath summer skies. Long highway patrols with the radio humming softly in the background. Always together. Always side by side. Rex took another step forward. Then another. His breathing grew faster. His tail remained still, but his body had begun to tremble. Not from fear. Recognition. Ethan's eyes filled with tears he had spent years refusing to shed. You remember, he whispered. The German shepherd stopped beside the table. For a long moment, he simply stared. Then he lowered his head and gently pressed his nose against Ethan's hand. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Claire looked away briefly, blinking back unexpected emotion. One officer cleared his throat and pretended to study the floor. Warden Pierce stood silent near the doorway. None of them wanted to interrupt what they were witnessing. Ethan closed his eyes. The warmth of Rex's muzzle against his skin felt exactly the same as it had 7 years ago. Time had changed almost everything else. Not this. Never this. Rex released a low sound deep in his throat. Not sadness. Not excitement. Something older. A sound of recognition. A sound of home. Then suddenly the dog stiffened. His ears snapped toward the far corner of the room. Chin Sua 23 minutes remained. The room that had moments earlier felt warm with reunion suddenly seemed colder. Rex stood beside Ethan, but his attention was fixed entirely on the observation window. Every instinct he possessed appeared to awaken at once. His ears stood rigid. His breathing slowed. His amber eyes narrowed with a focus that none of the people present could fully understand. Ethan followed the dog's stare. Beyond the glass stood several prison staff members and administrative observers. Most looked confused. One appeared nervous. Another shifted his weight and glanced away. Warden Pierce stepped closer to the window. What is it? He asked quietly, though no one expected an answer. Rex did not bark. He did not move. He simply watched. Ethan felt a strange sensation crawl through his memory. It was familiar. He had seen this exact posture countless times during his years working alongside Rex. This was not how the dog behaved when he was afraid. This was how he behaved when he remembered something important. Deputy Marshal Claire Dawson noticed the change as well. She opened the old personnel file she had been carrying throughout the day. Most of the pages contained routine records, training reports, transfer documents, evaluation summaries. Nothing unusual. Yet one folded sheet slipped loose and fell onto the table. Claire picked it up. The paper was yellowed with age. A forgotten incident report from 7 years earlier. Her eyes moved across the page. Then she frowned. That is strange. Ethan Liu. 14 minutes remained. The room no longer felt like a place reserved for final goodbyes. It felt like the center of a mystery that refused to stay buried. Warden Pierce stared at the forgotten report while Claire Dawson carefully examined every page attached behind it. Ethan remained seated beside Rex, though neither of them seemed focused on the clock anymore. The German Shepherd stood near the observation window, his attention fixed on the hallway beyond. Every few seconds his ears shifted toward distant sounds that no one else could hear. Then footsteps echoed outside. A middle-aged administrator entered carrying a small archive box. His name was Leonard Graves, head of records management. Snowflakes still clung to the shoulders of his coat. He looked slightly confused by the urgency of the request that had pulled him away from his office. "You wanted historical evidence storage records?" he asked. Claire nodded immediately. Specifically from the Walker investigation. Leonard opened the box and began sorting through old folders. Most contained routine chain of custody forms, transfer receipts, inventory sheets. Nothing remarkable. Then he paused. "That is odd." Everyone looked up. Leonard removed a thin envelope sealed with faded tape. A handwritten note across the front read "Temporary hold pending review." The envelope had never been opened. Claire carefully broke the seal. Inside sat a single storage inventory card and a small metal key attached to a tag. Ethan leaned forward. The number printed on the tag matched the storage locker mentioned in the forgotten report. Silence settled over the room. 7 years. 7 years that key had sat unnoticed inside an archive box. Warden Pierce slowly exhaled. Was the locker ever cleared? Leonard checked the inventory card. His eyes widened. "No." Claire frowned. "That is impossible." Leonard shook his head. According to this record, the lease remained active under administrative review. Nobody ever signed the final release authorization. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. The storage locker still existed. Rex suddenly turned away from the observation window and walked directly toward the envelope. His nose hovered above the metal key. Then he looked at Ethan, the same way he used to during investigations when he wanted his partner to notice something. Ethan understood immediately. "That locker matters." Claire stood. "We need someone to verify its contents." Warden Pierce glanced toward the clock. 13 minutes remained. Under normal circumstances, there would be no time. No chance. No possibility of reopening anything. Yet nothing about this day felt normal anymore. Then a voice spoke from the doorway. "The facility is only 6 miles away." Everyone turned. It was Deputy Director Michael Reeves from the State Corrections Office. He had arrived earlier as an observer and had remained silent throughout the afternoon. Now his expression carried unexpected concern. "I can have someone there in 10 minutes. Claire held up the key. "Do it." Reeves immediately reached for his phone. Across the room, Rex sat beside Ethan once more. The German Shepherd rested his head gently against the man's knee. For the first time all day, Ethan allowed himself to hope. Not because of paperwork, not because of officials, because of a dog who had remembered what everyone else forgot. 12 minutes remained. And somewhere beyond the prison walls, a locked storage unit waited quietly in the falling snow, holding secrets untouched for 7 long years. 3 minutes remained. Snow fell steadily outside Blackstone Correctional Facility, covering the parking lots and rooftops in a blanket of white. Inside the visitation room, nobody spoke above a whisper. Every eye seemed fixed on the phone resting in Deputy Director Michael Reeves's hand. Somewhere 6 miles away, a forgotten storage locker had just been opened for the first time in 7 years. Ethan sat motionless beside Rex. The German Shepherd remained pressed against his leg, calm now, as if he had already done everything he came here to do. The clock continued forward. Tick, tick, tick. Warden Pierce looked at the time and quietly rubbed a hand across his forehead. Procedures existed for a reason. Schedules existed for a reason. Yet the events of this day had pushed everyone far beyond routine. Then the phone vibrated. The room froze. Reeves answered immediately. Nobody could hear the voice on the other end, but they could see the color drain from his face. He turned away, listening carefully. Once, twice, 3 times he asked the caller to repeat what had been found. Finally, he lowered the phone and stared across the room. Silence stretched for several long seconds. "What is it?" Claire asked. Reeves swallowed hard. The locker contained evidence that was never submitted. Nobody moved. Ethan felt his heartbeat echo inside his chest. Reeves continued. Original investigative notes. Chain of custody records. Photographs. Multiple documents marked for review but never processed. Claire stood abruptly. Are they authentic? The identification numbers matched the original case. Warden Pierce looked stunned. How does that happen? Nobody had an answer. Reeves looked toward Ethan. There is more. The room grew even quieter. The documents indicate critical findings were never included in the final case file. Findings that directly contradict portions of the original investigation. Ethan lowered his head. For years he had prayed for someone to simply look again. Not to believe him. Not to rescue him. Just to look. Rex lifted his eyes toward his partner as though sensing the shift in the room. Claire took a slow breath. That changes everything. Reeves nodded. Legally, we cannot proceed until the material is reviewed. The words settled over the room like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Warden Pierce immediately reached for the phone mounted on the wall. His voice remained professional, but emotion crept into its edges. Suspend all remaining actions pending emergency review. Ethan closed his eyes. For a moment he could not speak. 7 years of waiting. 7 years of being unheard. 7 years of wondering whether truth still mattered. Beside him, Rex gently rested his head on Ethan's knee once again. The simple gesture nearly broke him. Outside, snow continued falling across Montana. Inside, the clock still ticked. But now its sound carried a different meaning. Not an ending. A pause. A chance. A beginning. 2 minutes earlier, Ethan Walker believed he was counting down the final moments of his life. Now every person in the room was staring at a future nobody had expected to see.